Sarah Mitchell had always believed that life gave you what you earned. Work hard, stay honest, do the right thing, and everything would fall into place. That's what her mother had taught her, and for most of her 32 years, it had seemed true enough. She'd never been rich, but she'd been comfortable. She had a job she was good at, managing a small retail store in downtown Portland. She had an apartment, nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom place with a leaky faucet and thin walls. But it was hers. She had friends, a routine, a life that made sense. Then, in the span of 6 months, it all fell apart. The store closed first. Corporate restructuring, they called it. Sarah remembered the day her district manager came in, avoiding eye contact, shuffling papers he didn't need to shuffle. 23 employees lost their jobs that Tuesday afternoon. Sarah had tried to stay positive. She'd been in retail for 10 years. Someone would hire her. She had experience, good references, a strong work ethic, but the economy was tight, and every job posting had hundreds of applicants. Weeks turned into months. Her savings dwindled, then disappeared. The unemployment checks helped, but they weren't enough to cover rent, food, and bills. She remembered the day she got the eviction notice. It was a Thursday in September, unusually cold for that time of year. The paper was taped to her door, official and impersonal, giving her 30 days to vacate. Sarah had sat on her worn couch and cried for the first time since losing her job. She'd called everyone she could think of. Her brother in Seattle said he'd help if he could, but he had 3 kids and barely made ends meet himself. Her college roommate offered her couch for a few days, but Sarah could hear the hesitation in her voice, the unspoken concerns about boundaries and inconvenience. Pride kept Sarah from pushing. She told herself she'd figure it out. She didn't figure it out. The shelter had seemed like a temporary solution, just until she got back on her feet. Sarah told herself it would be a week, maybe 2. The reality of shelter life hit her like cold water. The crowded rooms, the rules, the constant noise, the way people looked through you instead of at you. She shared a bunk bed with a woman named Rita, who coughed through the night and talked in her sleep about children who didn't visit anymore. Sarah would lie awake, staring at the stained ceiling, wondering how she'd become one of those people others crossed the street to avoid. Finding work became even harder once she didn't have an address. She couldn't list the shelter on applications without facing immediate judgment. She couldn't afford clean professional clothes for interviews. She couldn't even keep her phone charged reliably. The few interviews she managed to secure went nowhere. Employers could smell desperation and it scared them off. By late October, Sarah had been asked to leave the shelter. She'd missed curfew twice, coming back late from a job fair that had run long. Rules were rules, they told her. There were other people who needed the bed. She understood, but understanding didn't make it hurt any less. That night, she'd slept on a bench in Riverside Park, her backpack clutched against her chest, jumping at every sound. She'd never felt so invisible, so completely erased from the world she'd once belonged to. The days blurred together after that. Sarah learned the rhythms of street life quickly because she had to. She knew which coffee shops would let you use the bathroom without buying anything, which fast food restaurants threw away perfectly good food at closing time, which spots in the park were safest to sleep. She learned to avoid eye contact, to make herself small, to accept that most people would rather pretend she didn't exist than acknowledge her humanity. The hardest part wasn't the hunger or the cold or even the fear. It was the loneliness, the crushing, suffocating loneliness of being surrounded by thousands of people who looked past you like you were a ghost. Sarah had stopped trying to ask for help. The rejection stung too much. The way people would speed up their walking, clutch their purses tighter, or suddenly become very interested in their phones. She'd become what she'd once avoided looking at, and the shame of that realization ate at her every single day. She'd also stopped hoping. Hope required energy she didn't have anymore. Hope required believing that tomorrow might be different, and Sarah had learned that tomorrow was just another version of today, with maybe a little more rain or a little less food. She went through the motions because her body insisted on survival, but her mind had already started checking out. She caught herself sometimes, staring at nothing, realizing hours had passed and she couldn't remember a single thought she'd had. November arrived with bitter winds that cut through her thin jacket like it wasn't even there. Sarah had managed to find a better sleeping spot behind a row of closed shops near the river. It was more sheltered than the park, quieter, and the police didn't patrol it as often. She'd been staying there for 3 nights when she noticed the other regulars starting to eye her territory. An older man named Frank had warned her that winter was when things got desperate, when people who'd been civil all summer would fight over a good spot or a warm blanket. That Friday night, as Sarah arranged her few belongings in her usual corner, she found herself thinking about her mother. She'd died 4 years ago, cancer, too quick and too cruel. Her mother had been tough but loving, the kind of woman who believed in solutions and self-reliance. What would she think if she could see Sarah now? The thought made her stomach twist with shame. Her mother had worked 2 jobs to put Sarah through community college, had sacrificed so much to give her daughter opportunities, and Sarah had let it all slip away. She pulled out the one photograph she still carried, creased and worn, tucked in her wallet. It was from her college graduation. Sarah in her cap and gown, her mother beside her beaming with pride. They'd gone to dinner afterward at a nice restaurant, the kind with cloth napkins and prices that made them both wince, but her mother had insisted. "You earned this," she'd said. Sarah traced her mother's face in the photo, and something inside her broke completely. What was the point? What was she surviving for? Every day was the same struggle, the same hunger, the same cold, the same invisibility. She was 32 years old and had nothing. No family left who could help, no friends who remembered her, no job prospects, no home, no hope. She'd been telling herself she was fighting. But for what? To wake up tomorrow and do it all again? Sarah sat there in the cold November darkness listening to the city sounds around her, and made a decision. She was tired of fighting, tired of pretending things would get better, tired of being invisible. Tomorrow she would find a way to just stop, to stop struggling, stop hurting, stop being a burden on a world that clearly didn't have room for her anymore. The decision brought a strange sort of peace, a relief from the constant pressure to keep going. She wouldn't have to wake up another morning wondering where her next meal would come from, or whether she'd freeze overnight. She lay down on the cardboard she'd flattened for a mattress, pulled her jacket tight, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow she'd let go. But tonight she'd sleep. The city hummed around her, indifferent to her pain, indifferent to her decision, indifferent to everything she'd lost and everything she'd never be. Sarah Mitchell had nothing left to give, and she'd finally accepted it. Sarah woke to complete darkness, disoriented and cold. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was, and then the hard ground beneath her reminded her of everything. The alley, the cardboard, the decision she'd made before falling asleep. Morning hadn't come yet. She checked her phone, the battery at 4%. It was just past 2 in the morning. She'd barely slept 2 hours. She was about to close her eyes again when she heard it. Faint at first. So faint she thought she might be imagining it. Then louder, more insistent. A baby crying. Sarah froze, listening. The sound was coming from somewhere nearby, echoing off the brick walls of the buildings around her. She told herself to ignore it. It wasn't her problem. She didn't have the energy to deal with anyone else's crisis when she couldn't even handle her own. Whatever was happening, someone else could deal with it. She pulled her jacket over her head, trying to block out the sound. But the crying continued. It wasn't the fussy cry of a baby wanting attention. This was desperate, the kind of crying that came from real distress. Sarah had never been around babies much, but even she could hear the difference. This baby needed help. She lay there for another minute, fighting with herself. Every instinct told her to stay put, to save what little energy she had, to focus on getting through her own nightmare. But the crying didn't stop, and with each passing second it seemed to get more frantic. Finally, cursing under her breath, Sarah pushed herself up. Her body ached from sleeping on the ground, and the cold had settled deep into her bones. Following the sound, she made her way deeper into the alley, past dumpsters and piles of trash, her phone's flashlight casting weak shadows. The crying grew louder, coming from behind a large dumpster near the back wall. Sarah's heart started pounding. What if this was some kind of trap? She'd heard stories about people using recordings or other tricks to lure vulnerable people into dangerous situations. But when she rounded the dumpster, there was no trap. There was only a cardboard box, the kind that had once held a television or something similar, and inside it, wrapped in a dirty pink blanket, was a baby. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The baby couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 months old, with a round face red from crying, tiny fists waving in the air. The blanket was inadequate for the cold night, and the baby was only wearing a thin onesie underneath. As Sarah's light hit the box, she saw a piece of paper, torn from a notebook, pinned to the blanket with a safety pin. Her hands were shaking as she unpinned the note and read it by the light of her phone. The handwriting was shaky, almost illegible. "I can't do this anymore. Please help her. Her name is Hope. I'm so sorry." Sarah stood there staring at the baby, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Someone had left their child here. Behind a dumpster, in the cold, in the middle of the night. What kind of desperation drove a person to do something like that? And why here in this empty alley where the baby might not be found until it was too late? The baby's cries had quieted slightly, as if sensing Sarah's presence, but now she was whimpering. Small, distressed sounds that cut straight through Sarah's chest. Sarah knew what she should do. She should pick up the baby, walk to the nearest police station or hospital, and turn her over to people who could actually help. That was the right thing to do, the responsible thing. But Sarah couldn't move. She stood there, frozen, staring at this tiny human who had been abandoned just like she'd been abandoned by life. This baby had nothing, just like Sarah had nothing. The mother who'd left her was probably somewhere out there feeling exactly how Sarah felt, like there was no way forward, no way to keep going. Sarah understood that feeling in her bones. Slowly, carefully, Sarah knelt down and reached into the box. The baby was so light, so fragile. Sarah had never held a baby before, and she was terrified she'd do it wrong, but she managed to lift her out of the box and against her chest. The baby's crying stopped almost immediately, replaced by small hiccuping sounds. Sarah could feel the child's heartbeat fast and strong against her own chest. "It's okay," Sarah whispered, though she didn't know if she was talking to the baby or herself. "It's okay. I've got you." The words felt strange coming out of her mouth. She didn't have anything. She couldn't even take care of herself. How was she supposed to help this baby? But holding Hope, feeling her warmth, her aliveness, something shifted inside Sarah's chest. For the first time in months, someone needed her. Not in an abstract way, not in a way she could ignore or walk away from. This baby, this tiny, helpless human, needed her right now in this moment, or she might not survive the night. Sarah wrapped her jacket around the baby, holding her close. Hope's crying had stopped completely now, and she was making small cooing sounds, her eyes struggling to focus on Sarah's face in the dim light. Sarah started walking, not sure where she was going, just knowing she had to move, had to think, had to figure out what to do next. The streets were mostly empty at this hour. A few cars passed by, their headlights sweeping over Sarah, but no one stopped. She walked for blocks, the baby growing heavier in her arms, her own exhaustion threatening to overwhelm her. She knew she should find a hospital or a fire station, somewhere safe and warm where professionals could take over. But every time she got close to one of those places, her feet wouldn't cooperate. They kept walking past. By the time the sky started to lighten with the first hints of dawn, Sarah had walked nearly 2 miles. Her arms ached, her back hurt, and she was so tired she could barely think straight. But Hope had fallen asleep against her chest, peaceful and trusting, and Sarah couldn't bring herself to let go. She found herself at Riverside Park, the same park where she'd slept on benches just weeks ago. There was a small playground there, and Sarah sat on one of the swings, still holding Hope, rocking gently back and forth. The baby slept on, oblivious to the chaos she'd created in Sarah's mind. What was Sarah supposed to do? She'd spent last night deciding to give up on life, and now she was holding a life that depended on her. It felt cruel, like some cosmic joke. She had no money, no food, no shelter, no ability to care for a baby. The responsible thing, the right thing, was to turn Hope over to the authorities and walk away. Let people who knew what they were doing take over. People with resources and training and actual homes. But as she sat there watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, something her mother used to say came back to her. Sometimes God gives you what you need exactly when you're ready to give up. Her mother had said that during her cancer treatment, on one of the worst days when the pain had been unbearable. The next day, unexpectedly, she'd felt better, strong enough to take a walk outside for the first time in weeks. It hadn't lasted, the cancer had taken her in the end, but her mother had held on to that moment as proof that giving up was never the answer. Sarah looked down at Hope. At her tiny sleeping face, her small hands curled into fists. This baby had already been given up on once tonight. Maybe twice if Sarah took the easy way out and handed her over without a fight. But what if this was one of those moments her mother had talked about? What if finding hope wasn't random? What if it was exactly what both of them needed? The thought was crazy. Sarah knew it was crazy. She was homeless, broke, and had been planning to end her own struggle just hours ago. She had absolutely no business thinking she could help this baby. But the crazy thought wouldn't leave her alone. It dug in and held on, refusing to be dismissed by logic or reason. As the park started to come alive with early morning joggers and dog walkers, Sarah made a decision that was either the bravest or most foolish thing she'd ever done. She wasn't going to give up on Hope, which meant she couldn't give up on herself either. She didn't know how she was going to make it work. She didn't have a plan or resources or even a clear next step. But she had one thing she hadn't had yesterday, a reason to try. Sarah stood up from the swing, adjusting Hope in her arms, and started walking with purpose for the first time in months. There was a church a few blocks away, St. Anthony's. She'd walked past it dozens of times and noticed they had signs about a food program and community services. Maybe, just maybe, someone there could help. Not take Hope away, but help Sarah figure out how to give this baby a fighting chance. The sun was fully up now, and the city was waking around them. Sarah walked through the streets with a baby in her arms and nothing else in the world. But for the first time in months, she wasn't walking away from something. She was walking toward it. St. Anthony's Church was a modest building tucked between a laundromat and a convenience store, the kind of place you could walk past 100 times without really noticing. But as Sarah approached it that Sunday morning, cradling Hope against her chest, it looked like the most important building in the world. The front doors were heavy wood, and through the small windows Sarah could see lights on inside. She could hear voices, the sound of people moving around. Her hand hesitated on the door handle. What was she going to say? How do you explain finding an abandoned baby and then walking around with her all night instead of immediately calling the police? Would they think she'd done something wrong? Would they take Hope away and ask questions Sarah didn't know how to answer? Hope stirred in her arms, making small, hungry sounds, and the decision was made for her. The baby needed help now, and Sarah's pride or fear couldn't matter more than that. She pulled open the door and stepped inside. The warmth hit her immediately, along with the smell of coffee and something baking. Sarah found herself in a large room with folding tables set up, where a handful of people were organizing food donations. An older woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun looked up and smiled, but the smile faltered when she saw Sarah's appearance and the baby in her arms. "Can I help you, dear?" the woman asked, her voice kind but cautious. "I need to speak to someone," Sarah said, her voice rough from not using it much lately. "It's important. It's about the baby." The woman's expression shifted to concern. "Let me get Father Miguel." "Please sit down. You look exhausted." Sarah sank into one of the folding chairs, suddenly aware of just how tired she was. She'd been walking all night, and her body was starting to shut down. Hope was fully awake now and beginning to fuss again, probably hungry and needing a diaper change. Sarah had no idea how to do any of it. Father Miguel appeared a few minutes later. He was younger than Sarah expected, maybe in his early 40s, with warm brown eyes and an easy manner that immediately put her somewhat at ease. He pulled up a chair across from her and didn't speak right away, just looked at her and the baby with an expression that held no judgment, only concern. "I'm Miguel," he said simply. "Tell me what's happening." So Sarah did. She told him everything, the words tumbling out in a rush. How she'd lost her job and her apartment, how she'd ended up on the streets, how she'd found Hope abandoned in an alley just hours ago, how she knew she should have gone straight to the police but couldn't make herself do it, how she had nothing to offer this baby but somehow couldn't let her go. By the time she finished, tears were streaming down her face and she felt more vulnerable than she had in months. Father Miguel listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When Sarah finally fell silent, he was quiet for a long moment, watching Hope, who had started crying in earnest now, her face red with distress. "First things first," he said. "That baby needs to be fed and changed. Maria, can you help?" The gray-haired woman who'd greeted Sarah hurried over with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, she'd produced a bottle of formula from somewhere, tested the temperature, and was showing Sarah how to hold Hope while feeding her. Sarah's hands shook as she took the bottle, terrified she'd do it wrong. But Hope latched on immediately, drinking with desperate hunger that broke Sarah's heart. "There we go," Maria said softly. "You're doing fine. Just support her head like that. Perfect." Father Miguel watched them for a moment, then said, "Sarah, we need to call the authorities. You know that, right? This baby was abandoned and there are procedures that have to be followed. But I want you to know something. What you did last night, keeping her warm and safe, bringing her here, that took courage. A lot of people would have just walked away." "I thought about it," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was planning to walk away from everything. But you didn't." Father Miguel leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You chose to show up even when you had nothing left to give. That means something." Over the next hour, things moved quickly. Father Miguel called Child Protective Services, explaining the situation carefully. The police came too, taking Sarah's statement, asking her to show them exactly where she'd found the baby. Sarah led them back to the alley, pointing out the cardboard box still sitting behind the dumpster, the note still inside it. They took photos, asked more questions, their voices neutral and professional. Sarah couldn't read their expressions and didn't know if she was in trouble or not. Back at the church, a social worker named Janet arrived. She was in her 50s with tired eyes that had seen too much. But when she looked at Hope, now clean and fed and sleeping peacefully in Sarah's arms, her expression softened. "You've done a good job with her," Janet said. Sitting down next to Sarah, "She's healthy. No signs of abuse or neglect besides being abandoned. The note suggests the mother was desperate but wanted the baby to be found and cared for." "What happens now?" Sarah asked, her throat tight. "We'll need to take her into emergency custody. We'll start trying to locate the mother. But given the circumstances, she likely won't be found or will have already decided to terminate her parental rights. Hope will be placed in foster care while we work through the legal process." Sarah's arms tightened instinctively around the sleeping baby. "Can't she stay with me?" Janet's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Sarah, you're homeless. You're not in a position to care for a child. But I found her. I kept her safe. And that was wonderful, truly. But caring for a baby requires resources, a stable home, income, support. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to think about what's best for Hope." "I could get those things," Sarah said, desperation creeping into her voice. "I could find work, find a place to stay. I just need a chance." Father Miguel, who'd been standing nearby, spoke up. "Janet, could I have a word?" They stepped away, their voices too low for Sarah to hear. She looked down at Hope, at her tiny perfect face peaceful in sleep. The thought of handing her over to a stranger, of never seeing her again, felt like being torn in half. In less than 12 hours, this baby had become the center of Sarah's universe, the reason her heart was beating, the thing that made tomorrow matter. When Father Miguel and Janet returned, they both sat down. Janet pulled out some paperwork and a pen, her expression thoughtful. "Here's what we can do," Janet said. "Father Miguel has offered you temporary housing here at the church. They have a small apartment in the back that's used for emergency situations. He's also offered to vouch for you if you're willing to become an emergency foster parent for Hope, while we investigate and look for more permanent placement." Sarah's heart leaped. "Really? I can do that?" "It's not simple," Janet warned. "You'll need to complete emergency certification, which includes a background check, a home inspection, and attending some basic training sessions. You'll need to demonstrate that you can meet Hope's needs. Father Miguel is willing to support you in this, which carries weight, but the ultimate decision will come down to whether you can create a stable environment." "I can," Sarah said immediately. "I will. Just tell me what I need to do." "First, you need to be honest with me. Have you ever been arrested? Are there any issues in your background that would disqualify you from fostering?" Sarah shook her head. "No, nothing like that. I've never been in trouble. I just had bad luck and made some mistakes that led me to where I am now." Janet studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, here's what's going to happen. For today, Hope will stay with us at the emergency care facility. I know that's hard, but it's procedure. Tomorrow, you'll come to our office to start the emergency certification process. If you pass the background check and Father Miguel confirms he's providing you with stable housing, we can expedite the approval. With his advocacy and the unique circumstances of you finding Hope, I think we can have you approved as her emergency foster parent within 3 to 5 days. 3 to 5 days? Sarah's voice cracked. It felt like an eternity. That's actually incredibly fast, Janet said gently. Usually this process takes weeks or months. But given the circumstances and the fact that Hope has already bonded with you, we're making an exception. Can you do this, Sarah? Can you really commit to giving this child what she needs? Sarah looked down at Hope one more time. This tiny human who'd appeared in her life at the exact moment when she'd decided to give up. This baby who'd given her a reason to wake up tomorrow and try again. This unexpected gift that had come in the form of responsibility instead of relief. Yes, Sarah said. I can do this. I will do this. Janet nodded and stood up. Then let's get started. I need you to hand Hope over now, but this isn't goodbye. If you do everything right, if you show up and do the work, you'll see her again very soon. Handing Hope over to Janet was one of the hardest things Sarah had ever done. The baby started crying as soon as she left Sarah's arms, and the sound followed Sarah as Janet carried her out to her car. Sarah stood in the doorway of the church, watching them drive away, feeling like a piece of herself had been torn off and taken with them. Father Miguel's hand on her shoulder steadied her. Come on, let me show you where you'll be staying. Then we need to talk about what happens next. The apartment was small, just one room really, with a twin bed, a tiny bathroom, and a kitchenette. But it had a door that locked, heat that worked, and a window that looked out on the street. To Sarah, who'd been sleeping on cardboard in an alley just 24 hours ago, it looked like a palace. There's a catch, Father Miguel said, as Sarah stood in the middle of the room, still processing. You have to help with the food program in exchange for staying here. 4 hours a day, 6 days a week. You'll help serve meals, organize donations, that sort of thing. Are you willing? Absolutely, Sarah said without hesitation. And Sarah, he added, his voice gentle but serious, you need to understand something. This is your chance to turn everything around, not just for Hope, but for yourself. If you're serious about becoming her foster parent, you need to show Janet and everyone else that you can be stable, reliable, and capable. That means showing up every day, following through on every commitment, and rebuilding your life one day at a time. Can you do that? Sarah thought about the decision she'd made last night, about how close she'd come to giving up completely. She thought about Hope's face, her cries, her tiny hands grasping at air. She thought about the note pinned to the blanket. I can't do this anymore. Someone else had given up, but Sarah had a second chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. I can do that, she said, and this time, she meant it with every fiber of her being. The first morning Sarah woke up in the church apartment, she didn't recognize where she was. The softness of the mattress, the warmth of the blanket, the simple fact of a roof over her head felt foreign after weeks of sleeping rough. Then memory crashed back. Hope, the alley, the social worker taking the baby away, the promise of a second chance if she could prove herself worthy of it. She checked her phone. It was barely 5 in the morning, but she couldn't sleep anymore. In a few hours, she'd meet Janet at the Child Protective Services office to start the emergency certification process. Everything depended on the next few days. Sarah got up and looked at herself in the small bathroom mirror. Her reflection shocked her. She'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. Her hair was tangled and dirty. There were shadows under her eyes that made her look 10 years older than she was. This was the face of someone who'd given up on herself, and it wouldn't do. Not if she wanted to convince anyone she could care for a baby. She spent the next hour in the shower, using the small bottles of soap and shampoo Father Miguel had left for her, scrubbing away weeks of street life. She washed her clothes in the sink, hanging them to dry, and put on the only clean t-shirt she had left. It wasn't much, but it was a start. At 7, there was a knock on her door. Maria, the gray-haired woman from yesterday, stood there with a bag of groceries and a warm smile. Father Miguel thought you might need some food, she said, setting the bag on the small counter. There's bread, peanut butter, eggs, some fruit. Not fancy, but it'll keep you going. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. I don't know how to thank you enough. Just take care of yourself and that baby, Maria said, patting her arm. That's all the thanks we need. The food program starts serving breakfast at 8 if you want to join us. Might be good to eat before your appointment. The meeting with Janet lasted 3 hours. There were forms to fill out, questions to answer, explanations of what would be required of her. The background check would take a day or two. The home inspection would happen tomorrow. There were mandatory training sessions on infant care, safety protocols, recognizing signs of distress. Sarah absorbed it all, taking notes on a small pad of paper Maria had given her, determined not to miss a single detail. "I have to be honest with you," Janet said as the meeting wound down. "This is unusual. We don't typically place infants with foster parents who have no experience and were recently homeless. But Father Miguel spoke very highly of you, and the circumstances of how you found hope do demonstrate a certain level of care and responsibility. If you can pass the background check and show us a stable living situation, I'm willing to recommend emergency placement." "How is she?" Sarah asked, the question she'd been holding back the entire meeting finally breaking free. "Is Hope okay?" Janet's expression softened. "She's fine. Healthy and eating well. She's in a temporary care facility with trained staff. She's being looked after." But Sarah heard what Janet wasn't saying. Hope wasn't bonding with anyone. She was being looked after, but not loved. Not held by someone who'd walk through the cold night with her, who'd give up their own last hope to make sure she survived. The thought made Sarah's chest ache. The next day, Janet came to inspect the church apartment. She checked that the space was clean, that there was running water and heat, that the door locked. She took photos, made notes, asked Father Miguel questions about the church's stability and resources. Through it all, Sarah stood quietly, letting the apartment speak for itself, praying it was enough. "This will work for emergency placement," Janet finally said. "It's not ideal long-term, but for now it meets our minimum requirements. Your background check should come back tomorrow. If it's clear, we can move forward." That afternoon, Sarah started her shifts at the food program. She'd expected it to be difficult, being on the serving side instead of the receiving side, but it was harder than she'd imagined. Many of the people who came through the line were people she'd seen on the streets, people who'd shared benches in the park or given her tips on where to find food. They recognized her, and she could see the questions in their eyes. How had she gotten off the street so fast? What made her special? A man named Dennis, who she'd talked to a few times in the park, came through the line and stopped when he saw her. "Sarah, what happened? Last time I saw you, you were sleeping rough like the rest of us." "I got lucky," Sarah said, spooning vegetables onto his plate. "Someone gave me a chance." "Must be nice," Dennis said, but there was no bitterness in it, just a tired sort of resignation. "Hope it works out for you." After he left, Sarah had to step away for a minute, fighting tears. It could have been her still on the other side of that counter. Would have been her if not for Hope. The randomness of it all felt crushing. Why did she get a second chance when so many others didn't? Father Miguel found her in the supply closet, wiping her eyes. "It's hard, isn't it? Being reminded of where you were." "It's not fair," Sarah said. "All those people out there, they're not bad people. They just had bad luck, made mistakes. Why do I get to be the one who gets help?" "You're not the only one," Father Miguel said gently. "We help a lot of people here. But you're right, it's not fair. There aren't enough resources, enough housing, enough second chances to go around. All we can do is help the people we can help and hope they pay it forward someday." The training session started that evening. Sarah sat in a small classroom at the community center with 5 other people, all of them prospective foster parents, all of them looking more put together and prepared than she felt. The instructor, a woman named Carol who'd been fostering children for 15 years, went through everything: how to prepare bottles, how to recognize when a baby was sick, what to do in an emergency, the importance of routine and consistency. Sarah took notes on everything, her hand cramping from writing so much. After class, she stayed behind to ask Carol questions, to make sure she understood every detail. Carol looked at her curiously. "You're the one Father Miguel told me about, aren't you? The one who found the abandoned baby?" Sarah nodded, embarrassed. She hadn't realized Father Miguel had been talking to people about her situation. "That's quite a story," Carol said, "and quite a responsibility you're taking on. Can I give you some advice?" "Please. Being a foster parent is hard. It's harder than most people realize. You have to love these children knowing you might lose them. You have to give everything you have, even when you're exhausted, even when you feel like you have nothing left, and you can't do it for them. You have to do it for yourself, too. Take care of yourself or you'll burn out, and that won't help anyone." Sarah absorbed the words, understanding the weight of them. "How do you do it? How do you keep going?" Carol smiled. "You remember why you started. You focus on the small wins, and you build a support system. Don't try to do this alone." The background check came back clear 2 days later. Janet called Sarah with the news, and Sarah could hear the smile in her voice. Everything looks good. We're ready to move forward with emergency placement. Can you come pick up Hope tomorrow morning? Sarah's knees went weak with relief. Yes, absolutely. What time? 9 o'clock at our office. Bring a car seat if you have access to one. We'll provide everything else you need to get started. Diapers, formula, clothes, some basic supplies. We'll check in regularly to see how things are going. After she hung up, Sarah sat on her small bed and let herself cry. Not from sadness this time, but from overwhelming relief and terror mixed together. Tomorrow she'd be responsible for a human life. A tiny, fragile, completely dependent human who needed everything Sarah wasn't sure she knew how to give. That evening, Father Miguel knocked on her door with a surprise. Someone in the congregation heard about your situation and wanted to donate this. He wheeled in a stroller that had a car seat attachment. It was used but clean and in good condition. And Maria collected some baby clothes from her daughters. They're washed and ready. I don't know what to say, Sarah whispered. Say you'll show up tomorrow and every day after that. That's all anyone is asking. Sarah spent that night reading the materials from the training sessions, practicing how to hold a pretend baby using a rolled-up blanket, trying to memorize everything. She barely slept, too anxious and excited and terrified. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Hope's face, heard her cries, felt the weight of her in her arms. The next morning, Sarah was at the CPS office 30 minutes early. She'd dressed in her cleanest clothes, brushed her hair until it shone, and tried to look like someone capable of caring for a child. Janet met her with Hope in her arms, and the moment Sarah saw the baby, everything else faded away. Hey, sweet girl, Sarah said, her voice breaking. I came back, just like I promised. Hope looked at her with wide eyes, and Sarah could have sworn the baby recognized her. Janet showed Sarah how to secure Hope in the car seat, going through each step carefully. Then she handed Sarah a large bag filled with supplies. Remember, we'll be checking in regularly. You have my number if you need anything. There's a follow-up appointment next week. Don't miss it. I won't, Sarah promised. Walking back to the church with Hope in the stroller, Sarah felt like she was in a dream. People passed them on the street, probably seeing just another woman with a baby, having no idea of the journey that had brought them together. Sarah kept stopping to check on Hope to make sure she was real, that this was really happening. When they got back to the apartment, Sarah set up everything carefully. She fed Hope, changed her diaper with shaking hands, and then just held her, rocking back and forth, crying quiet tears of gratitude and fear. The apartment was too small. Her resources were too limited. Her experience was non-existent. By all practical measures, she was in no position to be doing this. But as Hope fell asleep against her chest, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in months. Purpose. Hope. A reason to wake up tomorrow and fight to make it better. This baby had saved her life by giving her something to live for. And Sarah was determined to prove that the faith everyone had placed in her wasn't misplaced. She had nothing left to give, but somehow she would find a way to give everything. The first week with Hope was the longest week of Sarah's life. She discovered that caring for an infant was nothing like she'd imagined. It was harder, more exhausting, more consuming than any job she'd ever had. Hope woke up every 2 hours through the night, crying for food or comfort, or sometimes for no reason Sarah could understand. Sarah would stumble out of bed in the dark, her eyes burning with exhaustion, and warm a bottle with shaking hands, wondering if she was doing it right. During the day, she had to balance caring for Hope with her commitment to the food program. Maria, bless her, helped watch the baby during Sarah's shifts, cooing over her and giving Sarah advice that ranged from helpful to overwhelming. Let her cry a little, it's good for her lungs. Never let her cry. She needs to know you're there. Sarah felt like she was drowning in contradictory information and her own inadequacy. But she showed up. Every morning at 8, she was in the church kitchen. Hope sleeping in a donated bassinet nearby, helping prepare breakfast. She chopped vegetables, served meals, cleaned tables, all while keeping one eye on the baby. Some of the people who came through the line knew her story. Others didn't care. Sarah felt their eyes on her sometimes, judging, questioning, wondering why she got to have a warm place to sleep while they went back to the streets. One afternoon, about 10 days after getting Hope back, a woman named Clara stopped Sarah as she was clearing tables. Clara was in her 50s with weathered skin and kind eyes that had seen too much. I heard what you did, Clara said quietly. How you found that baby and turned your life around. Want to know what I think? Sarah braced herself, expecting bitterness or resentment. What? I think you're brave. And I think you better not waste this chance. There's a lot of us out there who won't get one. So you do right by that baby, you hear me? You make it count. The words hit Sarah harder than any criticism could have. That night, after Hope was asleep, she sat in the dark apartment and cried. Not from sadness, but from the crushing weight of responsibility. So many people were watching her, hoping she'd succeed, counting on her to prove that second chances were real and mattered. What if she failed? What if she couldn't do this? But the next morning, Hope woke up smiling, making small gurgling sounds that might have been baby laughter, and Sarah found the strength to try again. The breakthrough came 2 weeks in. When Sarah met Mrs. Chen, she owned a small grocery store a few blocks from the church, and Sarah had been shopping there carefully with the small amount of money Janet had provided for baby supplies. Mrs. Chen was probably in her 60s, with sharp eyes that didn't miss anything. Sarah noticed her watching as she compared prices, calculated what she could afford, put items back that cost too much. You the one Father Miguel told me about? Mrs. Chen asked one day, her accent thick but her English clear. Sarah nodded, suddenly self-conscious. Yes, ma'am. You need job? The question caught Sarah off guard. I have to work at the church food program. It's part of the arrangement for my housing. What time you work? 8 to noon, 6 days a week. Mrs. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Baby sleep in afternoon? Usually. For about 2 hours. You come work for me 1 to 4, Monday through Friday. Baby sleep here in back room, I keep eye. You stock shelves, help customers, clean. I pay minimum wage, cash. You start tomorrow. Sarah stared at her, not quite believing what she was hearing. Really? You do that? You work hard? Yes, I'll work very hard. Then tomorrow, 1 o'clock. Don't be late. That job changed everything. It wasn't much money, but it was enough to start saving. Sarah opened a bank account for the first time in months, watching the small amounts add up. $20, then $50, then $100. She bought Hope new clothes, not donated ones. She got herself a winter coat that actually fit. She started to imagine, carefully, a future that extended beyond just surviving today. The work was hard. Mrs. Chen was demanding and had high standards. But she was also fair, and she kept her word about watching Hope. Sarah would find the baby in her bassinet in the storage room, Mrs. Chen nearby unpacking boxes and talking to her in Cantonese as if Hope understood every word. Hope seemed to love her, smiling and waving her tiny fist whenever she heard Mrs. Chen's voice. My daughter's grown now, Mrs. Chen told Sarah one day. Live in California, too busy for old mother. Nice to have baby around again. The CPS check-ins continued every week. Janet would visit the apartment, inspect Hope's living conditions, ask Sarah questions about feeding schedules and doctor appointments and any concerns. Sarah could tell Janet was surprised by how well things were going. She'd probably expected Sarah to struggle more, to fail. You're doing well, Janet said after one visit about a month in. Hope is healthy and clearly attached to you. You've maintained stable housing and added employment. This is exactly what we hoped to see. What happens next? Sarah asked. The question she'd been afraid to ask. We're still trying to locate Hope's mother, but we haven't had any success. If we can't find her, or if she doesn't come forward to reclaim parental rights, Hope will become available for adoption. The process usually takes 6 months to a year, sometimes longer. And then what? She goes to another family? Janet looked at her carefully. Not necessarily. As her foster parent, you'd have the opportunity to petition for adoption yourself, if you want to, and if you meet all the requirements. It's a big decision, Sarah. One you don't have to make right now. But Sarah had already made the decision. Probably the night she'd found Hope crying behind that dumpster. She just hadn't let herself believe it might actually be possible. The months that followed fell into a rhythm. Wake up with Hope at 5. Feed her, change her, play with her while the sun came up. Work at the food program from 8 to noon. Take Hope home for lunch and her nap. Work at Mrs. Chen's store from 1 to 4. Home again for dinner. Bath time, bedtime routine. Then collapse into bed herself, only to do it all again the next day. It was exhausting. Some days, Sarah felt like she was barely holding it together. Hope got sick with a cold and Sarah panicked, calling Janet at midnight, terrified she'd done something wrong. Hope started teething and cried for hours, inconsolable, and Sarah cried with her, feeling helpless. There were moments when Sarah wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake, if she was failing both of them. But there were other moments too. The first time Hope laughed, a real belly laugh that lit up her whole face. The day she rolled over for the first time and looked shocked by her own accomplishment. The evening Sarah came home from Mrs. Chen's store and Hope reached for her, choosing her over Maria, who'd been watching her. Those moments made everything worth it. Sarah also started to rebuild other parts of her life. She reconnected with her brother in Seattle, calling him to tell him about Hope. He was surprised, maybe a little skeptical, but he listened. He even sent a box of baby clothes his own kids had outgrown. "I'm proud of you," he said before hanging up, and Sarah cried because it was the first time anyone in her family had said that in years. She made friends with some of the other volunteers at the food program. Real friends. People who invited her to their homes for dinner, who offered to babysit when she needed a break, who treated her like a person rather than a charity case. She started to feel human again, like she was part of the world instead of invisible in it. Mrs. Chen gave her a raise after 3 months, just $1 more per hour, but it felt like winning the lottery. She started talking about maybe training Sarah to work the register, maybe giving her more hours. "You good worker," she said. "Reliable. That matters more than experience." 6 months after finding Hope, Sarah sat in Janet's office for what they called a permanency planning meeting. Hope, now 9 months old, sat on Sarah's lap, chewing on a teething ring and babbling happily. Janet had a file in front of her thick with papers. "Hope's mother has not come forward, and we've exhausted all avenues for locating her," Janet said. "Her parental rights have been legally terminated. Hope is now available for adoption." Sarah's heart started pounding. "What does that mean for me?" "It means you can file a petition for adoption if you want to. Your situation has stabilized considerably since we first met. You have steady employment, stable housing, and you've demonstrated a strong ability to meet Hope's needs. I'll be recommending approval of your adoption petition." "Really?" Sarah's voice cracked. "You think I can do this?" Janet smiled, a real warm smile that transformed her tired face. "Sarah, you've already been doing it. This just makes it official." The adoption process took another 4 months. There were more forms, more interviews, more home inspections. There was a court date where Sarah stood in front of a judge, Hope in her arms, and promised to love and care for this child for the rest of her life. The judge smiled and signed the papers, and just like that, Hope was legally hers. Sarah walked out of that courthouse with Hope, now 1 year old, in her arms and adoption papers in her bag, and she couldn't stop smiling. Maria and Father Miguel were waiting outside, holding a banner that said, "Congratulations." Mrs. Chen was there too, with a card and a stuffed animal for Hope. They all went back to the church for a small celebration. Nothing fancy, just cake and coffee and people who'd become her family. That night, Sarah sat in her small apartment, Hope asleep in the crib that Mrs. Chen had given them, and thought about the night she'd planned to give up. She'd been sitting in a different alley, not far from where she'd found Hope, with nothing left and no reason to continue. If someone had told her then that 1 year later she'd have a daughter, a home, a job, friends, and a future, she would have thought they were crazy.